Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Homeland Security Today. We're very happy to have an opportunity to sit down with Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner John Wagner from Customs and Border Protection. We've had a great relationship with you while you've been at the department. We appreciate you speaking to the Government Technology and Services Coalition. It's been really a great time, and I know that a lot of people were very sad to hear that you're leaving. Got any comments?
Well, yeah, I'm a bit sad too. It's like I mentioned, it's the only job I've had for 28 years. So, but a little excited about what the future holds.
And you've been at headquarters since 1999, which, a lot of people don't even realize there were years before 2000.
Yeah, I started with Customs in 1991 in New York City at the World Trade Center and took a detail down to Laredo, Texas, and ended up transferring there and spent 6 years on the border. And that was a lot of fun too. And then, came into Washington at the end of 99. So been here for quite some time.
Yes, and thank you for that. We appreciate anyone who's willing to come from the field and come to DC, because I know that's always a great phone call. So I will dig right in, because I know people are tuning in to hear a bit more about kind of your time at CBP, but really specifically more some of the work and the accomplishments that you've had implementing the biometrics program. So that is no small feat, not only in the private sector, but certainly within the government. And you have successfully piloted numerous projects. And so, we know a lot of people aren't very happy to see you go. Your breadth of experience, your implementation skills, your every type of skill is going to be dearly missed. But when you look back, what do you see as some of the challenges of implementing these biometrics programs?
Really, it was finding, using your creativity to find the solution that works for multiple stakeholders, and not just thinking about the government requirement only, in a say the typical stovepiped fashion, and just hammering it into the existing process and making everyone else, including the public, adjust to it. It was the creativity in trying to find a way where you could meet multiple requirements or concerns of the stakeholders, of the public and the government, and try to find the technology that lets you develop a solution that really works for everyone. And once we had figured that out, and then we could present it to our partners, and then everybody's creativity starts to come in, and they contribute that to build a system really that I think we're really just scratching the surface of. But we've started this momentum, and I think you're going to see just a lot of great and dynamic and intuitive changes out there in the years to come.
So that's a great segue, since the public views it in certain ways, but how do you view it evolving, like in the short term, so like the next 3 years, or where do you see us in 10 years?
I think what you'll see, the government required identity checks. Right now there's statutes that require you to present a passport or a visa or some type of, official travel document for international travel. So you'll see those transactions get automated using the technology, using the facial comparison, taking a picture of that traveler, comparing you against that photograph that's on your travel document. Beyond that, then it becomes, what else can we offer with this to improve the traveler experience, to improve other services at the airport, to improve the facilitative nature or even the security nature of other requirements. So you think about every place you stop to show that passport at the airport when you're on an international flight, you could automate with the simple having your picture taken, and not handing over your document to someone who's going to type it into a computer or swipe it, through a reader. But with those then comes a lot of the privacy implications and the responsibility on the government or the private industry that's doing it to advise people, is this required? Do I have to have my picture taken? What happens if I do? What happens if I don't? Where does the data go? Who keeps it? Who has access to it? So all of those conditions, have to be addressed. But I think once we get through that and we build that public confidence and the public sees that really ease of use and has the confidence to provide that kind of information, I think they'll opt in for those types of services at the airport. So future state, you could come and go through the airport on an international flight, potentially without actually having to hand over your passport to someone. Or if you're a foreign visitor, potentially, if we have your fingerprints on file, you wouldn't have to touch the fingerprint reader again and have your fingerprints taken, like is the case today. So coming or going from the United States could be a completely tokenless, automated, simple, consistent, efficient process that also meets the security requirements for the government or for TSA or for other requirements. So I think that's the future vision. If it goes beyond that, potentially it could, but again, a lot of privacy implications on doing that.
So you have been considering and evolving the biometrics program with a lot of those privacy and other concerns in mind. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
We realize we have to address all of the different concerns, the concerns of the stakeholders, the airlines, the airports, the traveling public, and the privacy community. And I've met several times with different members and different representatives of the privacy groups. I flew out to San Francisco, met with them a couple times in Washington, just to bring them in and to have that discussion about their perspectives, their requirements, their concerns, and we've had very good dialogue, and we're trying to build this program again to meet the congressional mandates, meet those government requirements, but do it in a way that also builds the confidence in the public that, number one, they understand what's happening, they understand the reasoning behind it, and what choices are available to them, or what happens if they don't opt out or opt in for these types of services. So very critical that we do that. We're always looking for better ways to reach people, to get the message out there. We could put up nice fancy signs in very impressive legalese at the airport. But who really reads signs at the airport, or who has time to digest all of the the fine print and the minutiae in those signs? So we try to put it in plain language. We try to put it just very simple. Your picture's being taken because if you don't want to have your picture taken, here's what you do. So we're trying to find other ways to just advise people what their options are. And that could be gate announcements by the airline personnel. Potentially, there's a way to print something on the boarding pass or through a mobile app or through other types of messaging, or maybe when you book your ticket. Lots of different ideas out there that, we're talking to the airlines and the airports to try to find what's just the easiest way to get through to people so they understand.
So you said something extremely important, I think, and that is whether people opt into these programs. Can you speak a little bit more to opting in? Because I know that when I go through the airport and have my fast track through security, I'm in love and I will opt in every time. So how are you protecting me?
So there are government requirements that people cannot opt out of. The law says you've got to have a passport. The law says certain foreign nationals have to provide their biometrics to CBP inbound or outbound. There's other authority CBP may have that could compel a traveler to produce their identification. We can check the validity of that identification. We can search the person and their belongings. This is on international journeys. Where the opt-in or opt-out can come in is how you meet those requirements or how those services are provided. So, for instance, if you're traveling into the United States and you're a foreign, say, have your picture taken, but you have to produce the passport, and we are going to examine it. And if there's questions about it, it could lead to a situation where we did take your biometrics to compare you against the passport if we had questions that maybe it wasn't yours or it was counterfeit. So it's a matter of advising people what the choices they would have, or how to accomplish those. So, for instance, also on departures, if the airline is allowing the facial recognition for baggage check when you check your bags, clearly it's not going to be a government requirement, but there is a government requirement to show your identification. So the airline will have different ways that you can accomplish that, and then it's up to you as the traveler to figure out what you're most comfortable doing or what's most convenient for you. And that's where we want to get to clearly advise people what their options are and how to do it. Same thing with boarding the aircraft. We have a camera there, it's taking pictures, it's meeting the biometric exit security mandate. But we're not going to require a traveler to give their biometrics to the airline. It may be convenient for them to do so because the airline provides it to CBP, but we would allow a traveler to opt out of that process and provide their biometrics directly to CBP. And we have to build out those optional procedures still, or how that would actually work. But again, that foreign national is going to be required to provide biometrics to CBP or face repercussions like having their visa canceled or their ESTA canceled. They may have different ways to do that, one through the airline, one directly to CBP, and that's what we really have to build out and advise people.
So I don't want to make this all about privacy because our point was really to talk to you about the future of biometrics and kind of your vision of it, because you're so in tune with what's happening. But what is the most persistent and inaccurate myth that you find around biometrics? And let's dispel it today. Put it to bed.
The privacy is incredibly important. There's lots of concerns in the public domain about the technology in general. And I think some of the myths come into being of exactly what the government is doing or not doing with this, and how we separate that from the discussion about other law enforcement agencies using the technology, but in a public space. So, for instance, at the airport, you're required to present your identification. CBP has the authority to adjudicate that identification. Make sure it's yours. Make sure it's a valid document. It hasn't been counterfeited or manipulated or belonged to somebody else. Those are requirements. We're using a technology just to help us make more efficient decisions. That, yes, this is your document and this document is valid because we've certified it against the issuing database or the issuing photograph from that database. So we have the assurances it's a valid document. That's all we're doing with those pictures we take of people at the airports. If you're a U.S. citizen, we discard the photo really as soon as we match it against your passport photo. But we're not running it against any other pictures really than your passport document, your visa document, or photographs we may take upon arrival in the U.S. We're not running it against social media. We're not running it against other photographs. These are not surveillance cameras that you don't know your picture is being taken. In this case, you're standing right in front of a camera. You know your picture is being taken, and it's only compared against that picture you've already given to the government for the purposes of travel. In a situation where establishing your identity is already required by law. So if we could put a box around that, and that's all we're doing here, and that's where we want to separate the discussion from a surveillance camera in a public space like a park, taking pictures of varying degrees of quality and running them against, say, some type of watch list or wanted list or other types of law enforcement databases, again, of which varying degrees of quality of those photographs and those conditions in which those pictures were taken. And you potentially matching against that, and a police officer in a public space compelling you to present identification. Now, a police officer can stop people in a public place, provided they can articulate certain factors. The discussion is, does the match of a facial recognition algorithm rise to that same level of suspicion that an officer could stop you in a public place and ask you for identification? And that's really where all the discussion is around. We talk about frameworks and use and tracking people in public. That's a much bigger, more complicated discussion that we'd like to separate that narrative from what we're doing at the ports of entry, and keep these distinct and apart, because we see a very useful case to help us make better decisions. Again, where it's already required and already going on, versus a whole new set of requirements where none exist today. So separating that myth and further diving down into that, the myths about the technology itself. And, as we saw in the most recent NIST report, better quality photographs, stronger algorithms, better conditions to take a photograph leads to much better, more accurate results. And the amount of errors in that technology really, really can be minimized by doing so. And then when you factor in, and this is what we'd like some more study on, we take a discrete set of people that are traveling, within a certain time frame or on a certain flight. We build a gallery of the photographs of the people expected to be on that flight, because the airlines tell us in advance who's supposed to be there. Your picture as a traveler is amongst those photographs. So how much is the accuracy increased by taking a good photograph of you and searching it against a limited database of photographs of which you're included in that, versus running you against a random set of photographs which you are probably not going to be in? So how does the accuracy increased by your pictures expected to be within that very, very small gallery of people, if pictures taken that are high quality in good conditions? So how does that compare then against the human factors of a person just looking at photographs and identification cards to try to match you against that person? Your picture's about this big on your passport, all different lighting conditions in an airport, and you're holding it up trying to figure out, I guess this kind of looks like you from 5 or 6 years ago.
Well, we all want a younger picture.
Right. But how much better is that algorithm against the human beings that can do that, who are prone to fatigue, prone to their own implicit biases they may not even be aware of, but might be better at certain photographs than others. So when we talk about the myths, it's really about describing what exactly we're doing against what we're not doing.
Right. And what you're really talking about are requirements that we have currently, but it's just hard copy. So it's like bringing us into the year 2020, where we're all on our phones. And so you all want to have that digitized technology supporting you as opposed to a paper photo, which seems really logical to me. But I know that we have also seen some major players pull out of the biometric market. Recently IBM pulled out and saying they're not going to participate in anything that could be mass surveillance, racial profiling, or violate people's basic human rights and freedoms. This is fanning the flames of more of those myths kind of circulating. Could you speak to that a little bit? I mean, is this concern real or is it political? It seems like these concerns have been addressed by CBP, and that your limited use is the use that's really required to travel in the United States, period.
Well, it's very powerful technology, so it has the potential to be misused. And again, like I mentioned earlier, in a public setting where there's no requirement to establish your identity, unlike at an airport, the potential for misuse is there without some structure around how it's used. The law enforcement agencies that I've spoken to that are using this in public spaces They generally use the technology, but then establish independent probable cause to stop a person and ask them for identification, or to take a or further law enforcement action on them. That the mere match against against some type of database is not the sole reason that they would use to justify stopping someone. That there's other independent factors that are assessed and taken into consideration that they can articulate before they do that. But I think that's where it gets around the discussion about, okay, that's a best practices of police departments. That may even be requirements from a district attorney's office to present a case, or a prosecutor's office to present a case. But does there need to be more standardized structure around this? And that's a great discussion to have. But again, separating that from automating a check that's already required in statute using a technology that can demonstrate it is accurate, it is efficient, and it's really quick, and it's really convenient for people. Can we carve out that piece of it and not, stymie that progression on the use of that? Because we're not inventing a new requirement to establish your identity. That's already there. It's just a new piece of technology that we're using to do it. There's different passport readers we've changed out over time. The fanciest ones now, it can actually detect if a document's been manipulated because it looks for the certain security features on it. We're always upgrading and get a better technology, and like this is the latest one.
Absolutely. So when you put the program in place, of course, could you speak a little bit to why you did it, and then how you're measuring its success? Like, do you have metrics in place that say, oh, this pilot's doing very well, and this is why?
Well, the requirement came from the biometric exit mandate. Multiple pieces of legislation by Congress over the years. It was a recommendation of the 9/11 Commission that certain foreign visitors must record their biometrics on arrival and biometrics on departure. The sense was the biographic data we were getting wasn't good enough to determine who's still in the country or who overstayed their authorized period of admission. So Congress passed multiple pieces of legislation over the years requiring DHS to do this. There were some trials done, some pilots, multiple studies. Again, looking at it in isolation, that this would be a standalone collection of biometrics, adjudication of the biometrics, injected into a very busy, very complex, very congested international airport environment. So the feasibility of the solution, including the costs, really never materialized. Everyone was concerned you're going to create gridlock at already congested airports. It's going to be confusing to use. What's really the benefit of this, and how would you really go about doing it? And what's the cost to the government? What's the cost to the travel? What's the cost to the airports? Who's going to run it? So a lot of concerns. And this project was given over to us in 2013. Congress transferred it directly to us. And, we looked at other systems we had built and leveraged for national security purposes, like the airline manifests and the vetting that we were already doing against the biographical data. We already knew the bad guys who were flying out of the country or the bad guys that were flying in, as well as the good guys coming and going, because we do all this advanced vetting on people. And we looked at the biometric as not really another enforcement query, because we already knew pretty much everything we needed to know about people. We just needed to know that was the right people that were flying, and could the real value of the biometric not be additional law enforcement queries, but validating the data we already had, that it belonged to the person we expected it to. Mm-hmm. And when we looked at it, we looked at, because we knew who was traveling, could we pre-position those biometrics beforehand And when we encounter the person, we only search against those pre-positioned biometrics. Does it make the process of using those biometrics a lot more efficient? So could you skip actually reading the passport? And could you skip, handling the travel document? And because we have photographs of American citizens, could we just simply take a picture of someone, which everybody knows how to do, right? Very intuitive to stand in front of a camera and smile. Everybody knows how to do that. Could we build a process simple enough that it's simple as taking your picture, and a second later, you're moving ahead and your identity requirement has been met? So it was developing that, bringing it to the airlines, bringing it to the airports, convincing them it's really this simple. So we did some demonstrations of it in just a bit of a standalone process with some of our partners. And we all quickly saw how accurate it was, how convenient it was, the security benefits, the facilitation benefits, the travelers not fumbling with documents and people smiling for a camera as they're boarding a plane. When do you ever see that, right? And it changed the whole atmosphere of what the boarding process could become. And that's where we're at today, is trying to define with our partners what that should be. Now, as far as how do you know this was successful is, well, we looked at the percentage of people we could confirm that it was them, the accuracy of what we were seeing with the match rates, the convenience factors and the intuitiveness factors for the travelers. This was speeding up boarding a plane by, in some cases, up to 40%. I think Lufthansa put out a press release last year that they were boarding the A380 in about 40% of the time. And it was really then starting to change the atmosphere of that boarding process, where everybody's jammed together and everybody's anxious, trying to push ahead to be next on the plane. You could, and everybody fumbling with their documents, right? And then the person who puts their phone up on the reader, the screensaver comes on, and then they're typing in their password, and everybody's grumbling in line, right? What did I do with my boarding pass? Or you see people with the boarding pass in their mouth, right? And they walk up and hand it. In today's pandemic terms, like the touchless part of this is a whole nother benefit of this. But what we could see is the passenger experience improved, the boarding times improved, and the government requirements were being met by actually building a facilitative process. So that's how we measured the success of what we were doing. And that's what really brought the stakeholders in to say, yeah, this is a really good idea. Let's expand and build upon this.
Excellent. So as you move forward with some of these pilot projects, do you have in place a way to identify some of the weaknesses and then it quickly evolve a solution to those? And how do you do that?
So we monitor the data. We look at, are we taking quality photographs, number one? Or if it's one of our stakeholders' cameras, is that taking quality photographs? Can we match against those photographs? And then are we building a complete gallery of photographs? So if there's 100 people on the flight, did we have 100 photos in that gallery? Or were there some gaps? There's always going to be cases where there might be gaps, because certain people, like the U.S. military doesn't require a passport to travel. So we're generally not going to have a photograph of that person to put in the gallery. Could be something we approach down the road, but did we build a complete gallery of what we should have had? And then what's our match rate against it? So we can monitor these and measure these, and we got teams of people that look at this, and then we can go make the adjustments, in the particulars of, sometimes it's the lighting conditions, sometimes it's the positioning of the camera, sometimes it's, fine tuning some of the camera metrics and the scope of the lens of where it takes the photograph. And then we work with the algorithm company to make sure we've got the latest updates and we're tweaking it to make sure we have the highest match rate possible. So the metrics are very, very important here.
And do you see any large new projects coming out around biometrics for CBP in the next few years, or are we kind of in a process where we're deploying more?
Both really, because it's building out the capability, rolling out the capability, but then it's also figuring out the form and function factors of how it's used. So, right now we have a big camera that a person stands in front of. How do we re-engineer the process now, knowing that the CBP inspection process could become more mobile and flexible? Could we take a picture of somebody with a phone? Could we have a body-worn camera that, as a person approaches the officer, it takes their picture and they're cleared on a smartwatch, right? Are there applications for that? Applications where we're outside of the airport, doing small vessels that are coming in foreign, or general aviation, where we might not have a full facility and the full suite of technology. And rather than bringing the people over to our facility to meet those requirements, we kind of bring the technology to them and do it plainside. So I think you'll see those things. We're really, again, just starting to think through how could we use this and what's the best way to use it. But the capability will be there. We'll take a picture of a person, confirm their identity, and then do our inspection, determine the purpose, the intent to travel, get their binding customs declaration, their agriculture declaration, and either admit them to the United States or send them in for further inspection. But it's those flexibilities on how and where those inspections are done is really what I think, it's wide open for us to define.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you for your service to CBP. And I really want to thank you for taking the time today to kind of delve into the details, because I think a lot of this can't be covered in 140 characters. And we need to spend time, just as Americans and as people, to really understand kind of what we're fighting and maybe we shouldn't be fighting, and understanding what an incredible process it is to sit all the stakeholders down and talk to the airlines and the public and the privacy groups and everyone that needed to be engaged. So you've been masterful at that. We really appreciate your time and dedication to bringing this technology into the airports and making our lives easier, because that was the point. So we appreciate that.
Safer and easier.
Safer and easier. That's right. And certainly to catch the bad guys before they get in. So we really, really appreciate that. So I like the fact that we were able to clarify that many of these things came from the 9/11 report, and that despite people sometimes forgetting a little bit about why we have DHS and why these things are in place, that there are people still implementing and making sure that we're protecting the country as much as we possibly can. So I know you've devoted your career to that. Can you tell us where you're going? Or are you just going to go relax?
Yeah, at this point. My last official day will be July 18th. After that, no idea.
All right. So we're going to see you very, very tan out somewhere.
Hopefully, if COVID calms down.
So, well, thank you again very much for joining us for this interview. I'm Christina Tanaschuk, the CEO and executive editor of HS Today. This is part of a new series, talking to some of our folks via Zoom and other things that have brought by the pandemic. This is great. It's been great to see you, and we appreciate your service, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Great, thank you.
Thanks again.